So, welcome to the editorial panel for the Rhythm of War release party. This is actually the first thing that we're recording for this. And so, forgive us if we have any bugs or mishaps or things like that. But we have three of the editors who worked on this book. We have Devi, who is the publisher at Tor, and the Vice President Macmillan, but also my editor. So thank you, Devi, for coming and joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We have Peter, who is my editorial director in my company. So the difference between Devi and Peter is Devi works at Tor, is kind of in charge of Tor. Peter works only with me. And so he does a lot of facilitating the comments that come from a lot of different places and collating them, and of course, adding his own. And what happens is when I am done with the revisions, normally an author would then have to oversee what are called the copy edit and things like that in the proofreads, which I don't do. I hand it to Peter and he takes over. We also have Karen. Karen is our continuity editor. Karen's primary job is to keep me honest and consistent. In writing the book, she keeps track of the timeline. She keeps track of all the characters, and she points out all the places where I say one thing and then say something different 2 books later. And the format of this little presentation is I'm going to step us through the creation of a book from the viewpoint of the editors, and we're going to let the editors kind of talk about their experiences. And then for the second half of this, we'll take some questions for editors that we've gotten through my Facebook. So for those who don't know, I usually do about 5 drafts of my books, which does not count the copy edit and proofread, which are separate drafts, you could say. So really, we're working with 7 different drafts. The first 2 drafts I do completely on my own in a perfect world. The first draft is the vomit draft, where I get everything on the page. And the second draft is where I go through and I fix the big problems that I introduced during the vomit draft. So most of the time, my team is seeing for the first time something when it's in a second draft. And a second draft is still not a good draft. It is a better draft. One of my questions for all of you is when you get these second drafts, how do you approach a draft that you know isn't where it needs to be yet? What sorts of things do you focus on, giving feedback on and helping, and what sort of things do you ignore? And how do you approach helping an author take something that is good and turn it into something great? And why don't we go to Devi first, and then we'll work our way around.
Sure. I think that's a very big question, and I think it depends on the author. Some authors are very happy with minimal kind of feedback. There have been authors I've talked to on the phone and had a conversation where I was like, this is a book that could use a lot more expansion here, here, and here. These are the weaknesses here, here, and here. And they'll completely get it, go, and take off with it. And I think that depends on the author and the book. There's other authors who need a very different style where they really want the more detail. This is a pinpoint place here. This is a pinpoint place here. Your characters need work over here. Your world building needs work over here. And so I would say it very much depends on the author and the book. And if you give me a specific kind of book, I would have to do like a kind of different edit based on that book. And it also depends on certain authors too, because some of them want to have the conversation before they've even written the book.
When you get a book the size of something like a Stormlight book, is your process any different for that than it would be for a shorter book?
My process is usually the same. I have to read a book twice before I edit it. Or rather, the first time I read it, I'm reading it as a reader and a fan, so I can just enjoy it. And the second time I read it to edit it. And the third time I'm going through, I'm compiling my editorial notes, I'm figuring it out. The problem with having such a big book like Stormlight Archive for me is that my memory is not very good anymore, nor has it ever been. So remembering all of the parts and pieces is kind of a process. And I use my notes to help me, like all the detailed notes that I write to myself / you and Peter, to help me kind of compile a bigger letter. So memory.
So Peter, what sorts of things are you looking for in that 2.0?
So basically in the 2.0, I'm going for my overall feelings on on how the book is going. I mean, basically, I go through each chapter, and then I write some notes at the end of the chapter and say, here are things that were really working well for me, and here are some things that weren't working so well. So, things that I don't pay attention to, spelling or grammar or any of those little things.
Right. That's hard to do. I've noticed, like, for newer editors, newer beta readers and things, like recently, Emily, my wife, has a book group, and she had them read Dawn Shard for feedback, and they could not get over the line level stuff. And so everything was line level. They were so focused on fixing the grammar here and things that they couldn't give any feedback on the full book. And I found that's very common, that sometimes it's just impossible to not focus on the detail. How do you make yourself focus on the large scale?
I mean, practice, honestly.
Yeah.
It's just a habit that I've gotten into. So, I mean, I can just look at this and say, oh, well, there's a problem. And then just move on, because I know that I'll have plenty of time to fix it later.
Karen, what are you looking for in 2.0?
Well, the first thing I do, like Davey, is read it through like a fan. And it's really hard for me because I'm the first person in the company who does that. Everybody else is still finishing up on the last thing. And so, I've got a couple of weeks where I can't say anything to anybody. And that's hard. But I on the first time through editing, I start my timeline, which is really one of the major things that I do. Is how many days has it been since the last scene with this person? Do the scenes with the other people fit in between those days? And so I start the timeline. I also just write a lot of kind of even notes to myself. This is twigging my spidey sense. I don't think this is quite right. And then on the next time through, I usually go through it twice on that draft. I will go look everything up and start putting stuff into the wiki so that I can look back at what's already been done in this book. Because other times I've missed stuff because I didn't write down everything that was happening in the book. And so from the start to the end, there were...
Maybe you should explain what the wiki is.
Okay, so I have this wiki, like an encyclopedia, and it has a page for every character, a page for every place, a page for every kind of spren, historical events, and just everything. I've got a lot of index pages, like who has been at Urithiru? Who can we find in the war camps in various groups? Who was on this ship? And so then on a character page, I'll have their nationality, whether they're dead or not.
Eye color.
Yes, eye color.
Whether they're dead or not is really handy to have.
Full description of, every part of them, what kind of clothes they like to wear, what their major backstory or
and usually these are all quotes from the books. You're like, description, here's a quote.
Right. I don't write interpretation. I just say description, quote 1, quote 2, quote 3. So that when somebody says, why do you think that they have brown eyes? I can say, because it said it right here.
This page, this book right there. It is really handy. It is a lot of work. One of the questions I have for you is, things change between drafts. And so someone's description may become completely different. How do you keep track of if things are changing in the book? You'll add something to the wiki. How do you revise that?
Well, in the wiki, I write in big capital letters draft.
Okay.
On those quotes. And then as I go back in the same book, if I get to the end, I can put in a final quote. But yeah, after I finish the book, I've got to go back and get final quotes for all those draft things.
Now, once this is all done, what comes back to me, usually from Devi, is more of an editorial letter than it is a line-by-line sort of critique. Devi, can you step us through what an editorial letter is and how you create one?
Oh, an editorial letter usually is kind of a compilation of all of the smaller notes that I take as I go through the manuscript. So in the draft 2 that I go through, I take all my little minor notes. And then when I write down the editorial letter, I go through it again and I think about what are the big things that I would like the author, you, to focus on. So kind of, here's the world building I want to think about. Here are the characters. Here are different things you could think about. Here are areas where you could strengthen this or this. I don't want to get too much into the detail because I don't want to give anything away.
Yeah,
but
we're trying not to give spoilers because you guys haven't read the book yet.
No spoilers. But it's kind of like a conversation that I want to have in terms of, here are certain things that really work for me. Here are things that I think are really great, but you could improve it by 2% by just doing this, So that's kind of how I put it together.
Yeah. When these come to me, what usually happens is that Peter then takes it and slices it up and gives the overarching notes at the top of a document for me. And then all the kind of section relevant notes he goes through and will add to the 2.0 draft, the Peter working draft. Will say, see this heading in the notes file.
Yeah.
And we've arrived at this process because I found what happened is when I was going through a book, if there were just huge texts of inserted commentary, I lost the thread of the narrative and it was really hard to revise. But what we found is if Peter puts a heading, say, see this, I can go to this heading in the notes document and I can read all the stuff that has been said about this idea across various chapters. And then usually Peter's really good at saying, and this here, it shows up in this chapter and in this chapter, and these sorts of things. Do you actually have one of these?
Yeah, so basically this shows the notes file. In the left column here, it starts with part 1, and then it has different headings, and it has Brandon's notes on whether he's addressed something or responded to it. And then it starts with the prologue and has some headings from the prologue. And on the right side, you can see a couple of the headings there. I have like about the flying speed from Hearthstone.
Yes. So stuff that, and this works really well for our process because it helps me keep these things as a heading in my head rather than a problem just for this chapter. I can go and see all the things that have been said about it, but also it lets me, when I'm working on the document, I will delete that comment and then massage anything I need to in this given chapter because I can then see the chapter and have the note file open next to me. And this is a really handy thing that Peter does.
Some people have asked, what does the manuscript look like when you get it back? And so he sends us a draft, and then what he gets back is that same Word document with comments all through it, just in line.
Yeah, we use track changes. I don't like the little things that pop the bubble out to the side. I like it right in line, but if it gets too big, I like it in a separate document. Yeah. And so what you would see is you get a page and it would have C, flying speed from Hearthstone, in kind of parentheses or brackets at the bottom of a paragraph. And in that paragraph, if I've gotten some things wrong, they've been changed. And if there's a sentence or two where like Karen's like, you might want to add a spren here. That mostly happens later, but it might say, here's a timeline thing that you're mentioning. This might not work with the timeline. It's all in line for me. And I start on page 1 and I go through it to create the next draft.
Yeah, I have a screenshot of the manuscript from after the beta read.
Okay.
Which is very similar.
So we'll show that when we get to the next draft, because what happens is I take all of this and I do a third draft. Now, I usually separate alpha readers from beta readers. The group here, these are the alpha readers. This and my writing group are essentially my alpha readers. And alpha readers are people that I'm looking to not only identify problems, but to offer solutions and to dig a little deeper into the story. When Peter notices something, he'll often offer, maybe if you did this, or, this is what the problem is. And it's more even doctor diagnosis stuff. This might be not working because the promises are just not working, that you haven't made the right promises earlier in the book. These sorts of things, I feel like I need industry professionals to give me, and the team does a very good job with that. I go through and I try to fix all of those problems or address them, or sometimes I don't change a thing. I decide, you know what, this is in line with my vision, even though it's a problem for this reader. And that's one thing that a lot of people ask me about the editorial process, and I'm going to kind of pitch to you, Davey, is how do you work without this idea where sometimes the author and the editor disagree on what should be done? How do you reconcile that?
It's your book.
That has been Davey's answer every time. That's not every editor's answer. Do you give a different answer to a brand new author than you give to me? And I actually don't know the answer to this.
I don't. I think every time I start a new author in terms of an edit letter, my edit letter usually starts with, everything I tell you is a suggestion. This is your book, your baby. Like, I am trying to help you change it. If you see a suggestion you don't like, you don't have to take it, but at least think about it. And if there's a different way to address it, address it. I'm not saying that I'm the right person, like the right and the only voice in this. Something that I say might be off, and you can fix something else, and that'll fix that problem, but it's just a matter of just look again.
Yeah, Moshe would always say to me that he doesn't always have the solution, but he wants me to try something else. Try something else here and see, because a lot of times what happens is if an author is nudged to try something else, that they will make the connection that what needs to be done and fix problems that even they and the editor weren't able to quite identify. It is a very nice process to just take another stab at something. The only time that Moshe and I couldn't reconcile on something is when I wanted to call something a podium and he wanted to call it a lectern, and he won. And that's the only time that I've had that. I had a lot of that with Harriet and the Wheel of Time because it was a special circumstance, right? Where it wasn't my book, it was Harriet's book. And in those cases, we always ended up bowing to Harriet because that's a different situation. On my books, if it comes down to the line, except for the lectern situation, it has always been that we go with what I want to have happen in the book. And so what's that?
You might want to explain Harriet too.
I should explain. So Harriet was Tor's original editorial director back in the 80s, and she was the editor of the Wheel of Time books and the wife of Robert Jordan. She was his editor first and then his wife. And I think that it's a good way to make sure that your editorial advice gets taken. And before he passed away, he asked her to find someone to finish the Wheel of Time series. And so she picked me, and she was the editor on that project. And she gave me a ton of flexibility to do what I needed to do. But she was the ultimate judge of whether something belonged in the Wheel of Time. And in hindsight, almost all the things I disagreed with her on have come to light as being good decisions. And the only ones I still quibble with are paragraph level things. There's nothing I've quibbled with that were large scale things. There were some things that were really difficult for me to cut from the book. As an example, we put in the charity anthology a sequence with Perrin that we cut from the book that I really wanted to stay in the book. And when I looked back at it last year to put it in with fresh eyes, I realized just how bad it was. To the point that I had to do a serious revision of it before I'd even let it go as a deleted scene into the anthology. And this is where having a really good editor is really handy, because there's someone who can step outside. Like, I can never step outside myself. That's just impossible. You can sometimes, and this is ideal, give yourself distance from a project to approach it fresh. But a really good editor has that brain that is not quite as emotionally invested in the story, but is equally emotionally invested in doing well. And really, I look for editorial advice to help me fix problems in this. And so maybe I would ask this next kind of question to you is, how do you, like, are there any specifics on how you can help a writer fix a problem when the writer doesn't even know yet what's wrong? And let's pitch that one to Peter first, because Davey, and then we'll let Davey take the last stab at this one. How do you help me fix something how do you help me realize it's a problem?
I mean, basically, I can say, this is what I think you're trying to do here.
Mm-hmm.
And then I say, and it's not working for me because of these reasons. But that might not necessarily be the actual reasons. And I can give some suggestions, but
Yeah.
there are a number of things where I'll point something out, and it actually takes several drafts before it really just kind of sinks in. And it takes more feedback from other people to say, yeah, you're right. It wasn't, when they notice without seeing my comments, when they start noticing the same things, then it becomes, oh yeah, maybe this is an issue that deserves a second look.
Yeah, that's what I was going to point out. I can think of multiple times where Peter has said something and I haven't changed it, and then the beta readers all point out the same thing. And that's when I realized, no, I really need to acknowledge this. Sometimes it takes me and Peter talking back and forth where I say, I'm not going to fix this. I don't think this is the problem. And then Peter explains it in a different way.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, this is the problem, because it's this thing where neither of us can define what it is. I think it's fine. Peter knows something's wrong, but can't actually define the right reason or what is wrong. And so what he writes, I'm like, no, that's not a problem. And then we talk and I'm like, oh, there is a problem. Peter's trying to dig at this other thing that he's noticed a symptom of that we need to fix. And that happens quite a bit, I would say.
Yeah.
There are still things that I don't fix, but when I do that, it is me acknowledging I am okay with people making this complaint, right? Like, Peter and Davey and Karen don't make complaints about the book that other people aren't going to notice, right? Like, they have an editorial eye. And so I have to be okay with the idea that a certain percentage of the readership might have this problem. And maybe that's okay with me because the thing I'm trying to do is more important to me than trying to please everyone, which you can't do in every book.
Yeah. And I also want to point out that there's a lot of times when I or Karen think something is a large issue, but it turns out that a very small change actually fixes it completely. Or just the changing the tone of an issue without really changing what happens.
Yeah.
Erases the problem.
Oh, that's something I should talk about, because one thing that Peter and I often have a disconnect on is looking at it as a writer, things that he thinks require a major rewrite. I'm like, oh no, that's easy. Things that he thinks will be easy, I'm like, oh man, it's going to be so hard. Because in revision, certain things don't require structural changes, even though you, as an editor, you might think they do. It requires a tone change. It just requires a character's perspective shift. And it turns out that sort of thing is actually a lot easier for me to do as a writer than a huge structural change. And a lot of times, like we had several, one on this book, where it's like, it looks like a huge revision. And when the book's out, we can talk about this. It was actually a lot easier than it looks, because I was shifting a character's pervasive viewpoint throughout the book. And it was an extensive rewrite, but it was an easy rewrite because I could just change that character's perspective in every chapter. And I had a goal, and I had ahead of me, I knew what I was doing. And so it wasn't very hard. The changes where you're like, I have no idea how I'm going to do this. This is going to require huge structural changes. The character's plot no longer works. I often bring up Sazed in book 3 of Mistborn as one of those really hard ones that sounds like just a perspective change, but it required a huge change in the way I was viewing the structure of his thing. So it was really hard. The one in Way of Kings, the original Way of Kings, where I split half of Dalinar's viewpoints out and made the Madelin viewpoints, was really hard. Though it was no more extensive than the revision we're talking about for this one, I just breezed through this revision. And then people got the next draft back and they're like, wow, this is fixed. This is so much better. Why didn't you do this the first time? But that was after the beta read, which maybe we should talk about what a beta read is. For me, a beta read is I call it a test run at the book. It's like a soft launch. You know how video games have a soft launch where they get a stress test of a certain number of people playing the game, a beta, if you will. I do that with my books. I do a stress test of 30 to 50 people who are under NDA and read the book. I'm just looking for their honest reactions to it. I'm not looking for them to fix problems. I like it when they identify them, though they don't always identify the right thing as the source of their problem. But when they talk about the problem they're having, it helps me. But I want to see what my audience thinks of a book. Davey, my experience has been that I do this more than a lot of writers. Do most writers you work with use beta readers? And how do they use their beta readers?
I think you are an exception in how you use your beta readers. A lot of writers have their writing groups, and I think a few of them have 1 or 2 people that read it, but I don't think anyone has the setup that you have in terms of using a beta reader and having the whole group and having Peter and all of that set up so that you have it as streamlined and as it's just a great process to have.
It's kind of strange to me that it isn't done more, because movies and video games and commercials and everybody, they all show things to test audiences and get feedback before it goes live. But a lot of writers I've noticed don't. They use basically a bunch of alpha readers, and then they revise the book and it's done. Our beta read process is pretty crazy, and Peter organizes this. So I'm going to pitch it back to you. Tell us what we do with the beta reader.
Right. Well, I think this is a major reason why a lot of writers don't do it, because it takes a lot of organization and time away from doing other things. And that's why I do it instead of Brandon. So basically, for this book, we had more than 60 beta readers, which is the biggest that we've ever had. Before, the most we had was 40 something. But essentially, we send them the book, but I run it through a script to number all the paragraphs in a specific way, so that in each chapter, each paragraph starts with a number that they can see, and no matter which platform they're viewing it on. Some people like to view it on their Kindle or whatever. And then I have a spreadsheet, which we use, just a Google spreadsheet, and they go onto that sheet, and there's just tabs along the bottom, and there's one for each chapter. And I do it by part in the book. So the Stormlight book has 5 parts. And so it'll have a tab for the prologue, and then chapter 1, etc. And so then there's color coding. They use a different color code for whether it's a plot issue, whether it's a character issue, or a culture comment, and things like that. And so basically, they go through paragraph by paragraph and just say, if something jumps out to them, they write a comment on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then to try to reduce the duplication of comments, that's why I have the paragraph numbers in there. So everything's in order. They can see if someone has made that comment already, and they can just...
they can sign their name to the end of the comment to agree with it. And it's actually, that's one of the most handy things you came up with for this, because he can write, here's this issue. By the way, 30 beta readers agreed with this or whatever. Usually you don't get that. By the time there's 9 or 10, they're like, okay, enough people have said this. But excuse me. But when I see a +9, I know, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I better pay a lot of attention to this one. It's really handy.
Yeah. And so, but the amount of words that the beta readers are writing, actually, for this book and the previous book for Oathbringer, it ends up being longer than the manuscript itself.
Yes.
And so if Brandon had to go through and look at every single beta reader comment, it would take months.
Yeah.
And so so back in the day when we only had 20, then I would go through and I would collate them. I would distill them down to the most essential comments, and then I would put that into the notes file and put the ones that can go, the small comments I would put straight into the manuscript itself. But starting with Oathbringer, I'm like, this is too much work even for me. And so I had to hire 2 people to go through and like Christy did the comments for part 3. She went and collated the comments for part 3. And I first I gave examples of how I did it in previous parts. And then she gave me samples of a few chapters and I said, well, you didn't do quite enough here in this, and here you included a few more comments than you actually needed to. And so basically, one thing that we're cutting out a lot more recently is positive comments because Brandon doesn't need to have his ego stroked, basically. But for this book, we actually hired another writer. We hired Peter O'Rulian to go through and do the collating. And then I went through his, and even some of that, I trimmed it down a little bit more. And some things I went and I said, I think there might be a little bit more here from the beta reader. So I went back to the original comments and then said, oh yeah, they were talking more about this. And so I added some more in.
And do you think, you're probably right, you think this is the book that we've done that has changed most between the draft before the beta readers and the one after? Didn't you say you thought this is the most, just by sheer number of lines changed?
Yes, I would agree. I mean, Oathbringer went really well.
Mm-hmm. There's only one major problem with Oathbringer that we need to fix.
Back in Words of Radiance, there were a few chapters that had to be added and some things had to be moved around. And I was hoping it'd be more like Oathbringer this time. But it ended up more like Words of Radiance and perhaps even a little more extensive. Yeah,
there was some major viewpoint shifts that I did with 2 of the characters. One that was a hard rewrite, and one that was an easy one, but required more actual work. Running out of time for Davey, and we'll go on a little bit after this. But I think, why don't I just ask you, I'm sure you get this question a lot, Davey. It's not specifically about my work, but what every new author wants to know what an editor is looking for. No editor wants to answer that question because the editor, what they're looking for is great storytelling, and they'll know it when they see it. But can you give us anything that like, when you know a book is really working, when it's really clicking, what are some of the things that you look for in those early manuscripts that just make you say, I can latch on. This is something that's going to work?
Most of the books that I have fallen in love with and acquired, I know within the first few pages that I'm going to buy that book. And I think those first few pages are true for almost every editor. Like, there are very few books where you're going to read halfway through and you're like, I guess I'm going to buy this book. And I would say within those first few pages, if you have great pacing and if you have the characters down and the world building down and all of that, you have it. But it's kind of hard for me to articulate in terms of what that spark is. And I would say it comes down to whether that book has spark. Like, there is something about that book that makes you want to keep turning the pages. You can't stop. There are some books where the language is so beautiful, you're just like, oh my God. Every book is different. Is that too vague an answer?
So Davey, I was wondering, so are there books sometimes where you're reading the first few pages and you're sure you're going to buy it, but then you get to the end and it just doesn't come together?
Rarely. Very, very rarely.
It would occur, it seems to me, and I've heard other editors talk about this, that an ending is actually one of those things you can fix, right? An editor can help you fix your ending. But an editor can't fix you can't fix that spark, can't fix whether the character, help you fix making interesting characters. That's much harder, right? If you can't write interesting characters, if you can't write something that is capable of grabbing attention and holding on, that's the thing that you need to be working on. And I mean, I have lots of friends who are bad at endings, and they all have great books with great endings that get released. It seems like an ending is actually one of those things that's kind of easy to fix, maybe. Davey, thank you so much. We're going to keep talking for a little bit, but we'll excuse you. Thank you for all your work on this book. You read the book like 4 times, and it's 450,000 words long. I really appreciate that. And you've been very handy. This is the first of my books that Davey was the editor on. Davey did work on Oathbringer as well, but this is your first full Brandon Sanderson book. So I hope we didn't overwhelm you with too many words.
I loved it. It was awesome. It was a pleasure. Thank you guys.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
So at this point, I have this document, but it also has something Karen's added. What do you add to the 3.0 draft before I look at it? This is usually the Spren draft and the kind of real timeline continuity stuff.
Yeah, so there is one draft where I read just straight through looking for spots where Spren should be. And, the things like wind spren and cold spren, those are easy to find spots for because you can search for keywords and just plop them around. I also look for scenes where there's just big emotion. So, sometimes I'll write lots of emotion here. Where do you want to do here? Other times I say, you'll say she was ashamed and I'll put in shame spren. And then the next time it comes around, you'll say she said this and then shame spren fluttered around her. And it becomes much more of a show than tell. And that's a really rewarding part of my process, that I can see specific things where the book got better because I wrote this word. And so that's a lot of fun. I also, on the timeline, by the time it gets back to Brandon for a 3rd or 4th draft, it's got a date stamp at the top of each chapter that says, this is the date. It's been this many days since the last chapter. In line, somebody will say, yeah, 3 days ago I did this, and I just cross it out and I say 2 to make it fit the timeline. And I've got this spreadsheet that's got like a couple of thousand lines of every chapter in every book, sometimes more than one per scene, saying, why the quote, which I do in the wiki, the quote and all the other stuff, and why I think this date is the way it is. Because sometimes we go back and say, okay, I can move that by a week or so if I need to. And sometimes I'm like, no, it has to be this day.
One of the things that changed because of this work in this draft was at the end, not to give spoilers, but I had a lot of things happening on the same day. And Karen's like, this is a lot of stuff to be happening on one day. I'm like, I'm pretty sure it'll work. She's like, okay. And so Karen said, well, for it to work, here are the timestamps of all these various things and where everyone is. And when she did that and I looked at it, I'm like, oh, this is ridiculous. It can't all happen on one day. And so I changed it to several days but it was kind of this like Karen doing the work and showing how it had to lock together to get everything on one day. Yes, it could happen, but it was so wild. There were so many, we were bending over backwards in so many different directions, if that metaphor even works, that I realized, okay, let's go ahead. And sometimes it takes me seeing that to make me say, okay, we'll do, that is more unrealistic than the changes I have to make, which are still slightly unrealistic, but there's less unrealistic to make those changes.
Another big timeline thing we had in this one was the flashback sequence, because we'd already had a lot of those scenes and even some of them as flashbacks. And so weaving in what we know from old stuff and what we've got here, sometimes I'm like, okay, if we do this day and then there's a high storm and then this the next day, we can make this match the old one that kind of spread over a couple of days. But that was a big tricky one in this.
This is a hard series because we have flashbacks in every book that, we know what they're going to be, but until I write them, I don't know exactly the shape they're going to take. And because of that, the narrative timeline of all of these things gets a little sticky. And sometimes we just say, we got to go back and change Way of Kings. There's just, we didn't realize we had this problem until we wrote the things. And so Dalinar can't be here and here at the same time. And we do sometimes make those calls. We're just going to change it. And we hope that you all understand that we try to keep it as neat and tight as we can. But 10 years ago now, when I wrote the first book, and I'm still writing flashback sequences that need to be in continuity with things said in that first book. And sometimes just like, you know what, we'll go ahead and give ourselves a mulligan on that one.
And there's a few changes in the 10th anniversary edition that.
Yeah, I keep meaning, and maybe we should do this every time we do changes, to have a bug fix, like explanation of why we made the changes. And I think maybe that would be worth doing when we release this book, is at some point have a Peter Wright get down, say, okay, we changed this line in Way of Kings because of this. This is the new continuity, and just kind of be upfront. I don't know if we have the time to do that. That's it's another thing to do. But all right, so this all comes back to me, and this is the big draft. This is the hard draft, right? Because instead of having 5 people's feedback on this one, I now have 60 people's feedback, and it has been culled down very expertly. But it is also me seeing if things I tried work, where things that you try don't like. Usually most things work, but there's always going to be things that you tried that didn't land. And most of the time when I'm making revisions in this, it's because something I wanted to happen didn't land. It's not that people are, changing my vision of the book, but things I thought would work just didn't work for the audience. And some subtle changes in the style of the story can make these things land. If you want some examples of this, if you did the Kickstarter, you will get for Dawn Shard the revision, like me explaining the different revisions and why I made the changes I did, and all the different drafts, so you can kind of pour through that and see. You can see the kind of subtle changes in that book. Like there's a character whose personality I just need to bring much more to the forefront to make them relevant for you caring about what's happening. And I knew that needed to happen, but I didn't know the extent of what it needed to happen until I got the beta read. And this beta read really lets me see the shape of the novel I created and the emotional impact it's having on my readers, and see if there are better ways to make different plot sequences land. I've talked about changing the way that Shallan interacts with her personal psychology and her mental illness in this book. And that required me having people read the book who share Shallan's, way of seeing the world and saying, no, this is how it would happen. This is how people like me are presented poorly in media. This is how I wish they were presented, because it would be more accurate. And that's just not something I could do until I had those reads. And it required some extensive rewrites and revisions to get it right. But the fun thing about this is, by getting it right for those subject matter experts, universally, people who read the new versions liked it better, whether or not they knew anything about dissociative identity disorder or anything like that. Universally, like, wow, this chapter reads so much better now. And it is interesting that by trying to make it more accurate, we also just made it way more readable, way better, way more interesting. Yeah. And so that revision is the big, difficult one. And often when I'm doing a revision, I can move at 10 to 15,000 words a day in revision. And when these revisions happen, I optimistically be like, maybe I can get to 10. Usually it's more like 7, 8, maybe 6,000 words in a day of work. But then when that one is done, then I get to do another easy revision, because at this point I do the final polish. And so I've finished the 4.0, and the 5.0 is just me trying to trim and tighten the language. This is where we use a line editor, which Christy is not here right now. She is now our primary line editor. It used to be that Moshe, who was my editor for most of my books, would do the line edit as well as this, the content edit. Devi does content edit. Line editing is not really Davi's thing, and so we kind of split that into 2 people. And so for this book, the primary line editor was Christy. And she goes through the book, looks for awkward sentences, looks for grammatical problems. And it's not really a proofread. It's more of a, this sentence is awkward. This doesn't make sense on a paragraph or line level. A lot of times what she's catching is during all this revision process, I've introduced errors because I've cut out half of a sentence and half of another and stuck them together. And in my brain, they work. But sometimes you just miss that it doesn't read well anymore. And she highlights those. Peter does a very helpful thing on this where do you have a script that does this?
Yeah, I have a script in Microsoft Word, essentially, that it'll go through and highlight a certain type of word, like
Looked is one.
Yeah. For
Um,
example, looked or places where there's adverbs and stuff.
yeah, and a word that usually indicates passive voice.
Right.
And he can just run these scripts and it highlights and brackets all of those words for me. And I would say half of them don't need to be changed, right? I'm using correctly. About half the time, though, it's like, oh, I can use a much better word here. Or, wow, I have used that word a ton. And Peter actually does some actual line-by-line fixes where he notices, even if they're not on this list, that I'm using a word that's not that common a word twice in 2 pages, and will bracket them for me and things. And this is just to try to make the prose more readable. Number one goal is more readable. Number two, more evocative, interesting, and well-written, right? And this is the final polish. And this is actually an easy revision. I look forward to these revisions, even though I'm really tired of the book by this point, because that other revision is so hard. Doing one that I can just focus on. Is this a good line or not? Nope, let's make it a good line. Okay, I'm done with that one. It's just a really relaxing edit to do.
And you also tend to, you tighten things up.
Yeah.
You keep the spreadsheet of what percentage you've cut off.
And I don't have to do that on every book. It's if a book is feeling really fatty to me, I'll keep a spreadsheet and force myself to give it. These days, I cut 5% naturally. And if 5 to 7% feels the right amount, I don't need the spreadsheet. If I have to get up to 10%, then I will use the spreadsheet. I used it on Oathbringer. I didn't use it on Rhythm of War. And so it just is my instinct for how much needs to be cut, because these days, in each draft, I am cutting some of that. It's just this is my last time to really focus on it. And so at that point, the book gets handed over to Peter. And do you want to explain the copy edit and the proofread?
Right. So sure. At that point, it goes to Tor, and then it's copy edited. But Tor does other copy editing using freelancers.
Mm-hmm.
Our copy editor, who has done all of Brandon's books at Tor, is Terry McGarry.
We really like Terry.
Yeah, she's also an author in her own right and has written several fantasy novels. But she's really good. Basically, I have a screenshot here of the prologue that's come through. So the copy editor, one thing they do is they change all the styles in Microsoft Word and stuff, so that when after this, the publisher will take it and put it in a program called InDesign, and these styles will transfer over so that they in InDesign will know how it's going to look on the page. So she'll go through and basically this is where the grammar, mostly it's okay. So spelling here is definitely where she will fix the spelling if we haven't fixed it already. And then if there's something that the grammar just doesn't work, she'll try to fix it or say, here the sense of this sentence isn't coming together. She'll do a query here and say, does this mean what it appears to mean? And so she'll have a lot of queries on the side, and we do this in the past was done on paper, but
Yeah. Before I had Peter, I had to go through on paper, and I would have to set any changes I didn't want made.
Yeah.
It was assumed that if the copy editor made the change, it was going to get made unless I said, no,
Right.
Don't make that one.
That's true. And that's still the case, but it's all done in Microsoft Word now. and just I'll go through and I'll mark it, and that if we want to do what Terry's written there, I'll just leave it the way it is. Oftentimes, I'll say, yes, this is an issue, but we're going to fix it a different way, and I'll just fix it a different way. Occasionally, there are things where I have to go to Brandon and say, Terry actually found a continuity error here where this thing's in this chapter, but 12 chapters later, it's this other thing. And so we have to do a little brainstorm and figure out how to fix it. Usually it's something very easy to change.
Yeah, I sit on Peter's couch. Actually, I sometimes just lounge on it and sit there, and he throws things and says, all right, do you want this word to be capitalized all the way through? You've done it both ways.
Yeah.
Which one do you want? All right, you've used this turn and this turn. Are both terms correct, or do you want to standardize as one of them?
Yeah.
Oh, this is a continuity error. You say this, you say this. Which one do you want it to be? We just kind of work through them like that. And usually they are really easy fix, where I'm like, go with that one, or I don't care, you pick it, and stuff like that.
Can I add something here? One of the things that I do in my process is that I have a spreadsheet called Rhythm of War Terms. And in it, I will list all the names of the people that are in this book and all of the Parshman rhythms that are in this book. And then I give that to the copy editor so that they have correct spelling of all the names and a lot of what should be capitalized and what shouldn't. And other things like that.
For a lot of authors, actually the copy editor will just make that list themselves. We're just giving the copy editor a little hand.
We're overachievers
Yeah.
in some of these things. Or you could say control freaks.
Well, it's 4 times as long as another book.
Yeah.
So really.
And it's 4 books in continuity, because we don't expect Terry to catch continuity errors between books and stuff. That's not the copy editor's job,
right.
In this case. But then the proofread happens, and the proofread we do a different way from most people. Like most things we do a different way. We do the proofreads differently.
Yeah. So we talked about beta readers. After beta readers, then we have gamma readers, just because that's the way the Greek alphabet goes.
Yes.
So basically, I make another spreadsheet on Google, and I divide up the book then into. With the copy editor, it was still in the manuscript form. But then after I go through and I approve the entire copy edit for the whole book, then it goes and it's composited. So compositing is where they put it into the final form where the words look like they're looking the way they look in the final book. So they've got the headings. If a book has headings, these books are so long that they actually got rid of the headings in order to fit more words on the page. But they got rid of they didn't get rid of the headings. They put the page number over in the corner in order to fill more. It's at the bottom. Okay, so the pages look the way that they look in the final book, and then I will get a bunch of gamma readers together and we'll send them a PDF. And for this book, we divided it up into 50-page sections, and I had on the spreadsheet where they go through and they would claim a 50-page section. And so just to make sure that all the sections are claimed, and then that each section gets 2 or 3 other people who look at the same section, and as many as they could look at within the couple weeks that we had to do this, about 10 days, something like
We do
that.
not get a lot of time on these because this is mostly my fault, right? I pick when the books get published, which is rare for an author, but I kind of get to pick my publication dates. And I feel that we need to be releasing Stormlight books every 3 years, or we just won't finish them in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, and because they're so big, it's usually a scramble the whole time through. It's basically, we get 18 months off and then 18 months of Stormlight that is just kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And we try to do what we can to de-crazyify that as much as possible. But it would be very easy to let each book slip another year. And you've seen this in other book series where it just gets longer and longer between releases. And that could happen with us. And so if there are problems, it's my fault because I demand this aggressive schedule, and I think you guys would all rather us finish the series in my lifetime. But it does mean that Peter doesn't get the time he needs to really make the book as continuity problem-free and as typo-free as he would like.
Well, so far, I mean, it actually worked out pretty well for this book. Since we turned it in, I've only found 7 errors. And
any of them on the title page? Or no, the table of contents?
well, there is one on the table of contents, but it's not as bad as the one for the previous book. Yeah. Probably people won't even notice this one. And there are actually 2 in the acknowledgments. But so out of the out of the 7, 3 of them are in the front stuff that most people won't look at anyway.
That's right.
Yeah. But I mean, so on this spreadsheet, people will, this is basically, they're looking for the errors that have slipped through. And they'll write in what they think the error is. And if I think it's not an error, I'll just strike it out, as you can see in this in the screenshot here. And then if it's something where I definitely need to do it, I mark it green. If it's something where I need to take another look, I mark it yellow. And then I go through at the end and change all of those to either strikeouts or greens.
Is this fun? Do you enjoy that part of it? Like, which of the editorial drafts is the most fun for you to work on?
Oh, it's hard to, I mean, it would be more fun if I weren't so rushed.
Yeah. This one would probably
that's-
be the most fun for you if it weren't so rushed, or?
I don't know.
Mhm.
There are so many different parts of my process that are so different from each other. So it's hard to pick favorites.
The nice thing about the job we do is it's always changing, right?
Yeah.
Like, even if you're doing the same thing, you're doing it on a different book, which has different problems. This is not a job, and this is part of the reasons I love being a writer, is there's always something new to do, always something different. And it really keeps you sharp, and it really keeps you engaged.
Mhm.
But we are all so tired of the book by the time it's done. So tired of the book. So I'm glad that you guys, I hope you guys will enjoy it, but we're at this point where I've had now 3 months where I'm like, I'm done with that book. It's okay. But you are just finished where you're like,
Yeah, I mean,
this is where the book gets thrown down the stairs.
yes. I mean, so after I get that spreadsheet thing, then I transfer all of the things onto the actual pages, and I scan those in and send them back. And I got a couple of screenshots here.
Mhm.
One where I fixed that first green thing, and then the second one where it's an example of errors that are caught only at the proofreading stage. Like, this is a thing called a stack, where 3 lines in a row end with the letter Y. And
Mhm. It looks weird on the
Yeah,
page.
it
It
looks weird
kicks
on the
people out
page.
of books.
Yep. And so that's something that gets fixed.
And it fit, like, yeah, they're not always just proofreading. There's the widows and orphans, which are writing terms for like words or lines that are awkward at the bottom of a page by themselves and just look strange. Things that will kick people out of the book for reasons not to do with the actual content of the book, but with the formatting and layout.
And at this point, you'd think that this is the end.
Mhm.
But they have to send me a couple more PDFs after this, and I make sure the corrections were made correctly. And occasionally while I'm checking a correction, I'll say, oh, I found something else.
When is the time where you read the book backward?
Well, that is while the gamma readers are doing their read, I do the entire book. I read it backwards. I mean,
Paragraph by paragraph.
Well, I go page by page.
Okay.
Usually I do about half a page. So I start at the last page of the book, and then I work my way to the beginning. I do about half a page reading down, and then I go back up to the top of the page and read down. So when I'm reading it like that, I'm able to keep myself from getting too engrossed in the story, which is always a danger of branded books.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, Emily, my wife, has trouble being an alpha or beta reader because she just gets lost and she's like, oh, it's 3 hours later and I haven't written a comment down because
Yeah.
I'm reading the book. So
And I have a music collection with like 20,000 songs in it, and I'm always like changing my rating of how much I like the song. And so every like 2 or 3 minutes, a new song comes on, and I'm like, oh, have I just been lost in a paragraph? I really need to go and
that's a handy tip.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
But after we're finished with the text, then we move on to the audiobook. And after we're done with the audiobook, then we actually move on to making the ebook look really good and have the best color images and all that sort of thing. And I just sent in my latest feedback on the ebook yesterday.
Yeah, we do, because we have so much art in these books, sometimes publishers don't take the time that they should to make sure the images look good in the ebook. That's getting better and better over the years. But early, the first books, there was a lot of things that Peter needed to do to go to them and say, look, this is just not going to be readable. This map, you can't put this map in like this.
Yeah. I mean, basically, Brandon is the author who's doing this. And so the ebook people just aren't used to that.
Yeah, there aren't other authors doing this extensive of an artwork integration into a long prose novel.
But because the book has been turned in for several months now.
Yeah.
When did we turn it in? I was like,
I know. I finished.
Oh gosh.
I finished July.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So like it was the end of August.
Yeah, end of August. So basically, we were able, those 7 errors, we were able to get all of them except one fixed in the audiobook. So the audiobook is slightly better. And then the ebook, we have all 7 of those fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. We actually
we will get them fixed in reprints in the print version. Yeah.
We have a few questions. We're not going to be able to take a ton of these, but we've got a few interesting questions on our Facebook that I want to try to address. So first question is, how often do I push back on advice from my editorial team? It depends on who among the editorial team is making the comment and at what stage it is. For instance, the only people I push back on, mean that I write to, are generally going to be Peter, Karen, and Devi, right? Everyone else, they'll make feedback and it goes into the void that is Brandon Sanderson, and maybe I'll make the change or maybe they won't. These 3, I will write sometimes a rebuttal. And if I write a rebuttal, it is me wanting them to respond, right? If it's just something that I'm just not going to change at all, I often won't write anything, which is kind of frustrating for Peter. And I realize that it's part of the time crunch thing.
Yeah.
In an ideal world, I'd be able to respond each way, because by responding and saying, this is why I'm not making this, it would probably explain to him so that the future feedback would be better. Or there might be things that I would change if he would be like, oh no, you misunderstood this, it's this. But a lot of the changes are very simple things that I just make. I'm just like, oh yeah, change this word here and it fixes this. Other things are like, I'm okay with that response. I'm okay that a segment of the population will have that response because I think I gained something from this in tandem with it. Yeah.
In Dawnshard, there is a change that I fought you on over and over and over. I'm like, I cannot believe that these people did this. This is absolutely not okay.
Mm-hmm.
And in the last draft, you added a little bit of what this character is seeing and a little bit of a concession to my complaints, and I have zero problem.
Oh, really? I'm happy to hear that, because I thought you'd still have a problem with it.
Just fine.
Okay. Yeah. It changed it. It was actually a different problem I changed that also mitigated your problem.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But oftentimes, so I try not to push back in the writing group. It's hard because pushing back in the writing group sometimes gets them to fix the problem for me. But it also, if you push back too much against people, they will stop giving you feedback, because they'll be like, well, they're just not going to listen anyway, right? And that's particularly problematic in a writing group where you want to have people making a discussion about your books. But I will push back against my alpha readers if I feel like me pushing back is going to get them to either understand what I wanted and be like, oh, that sounds right, maybe you should do this to fix this, or to get them to say, no, you're misunderstanding. I don't think that works at all. It just gets me another viewpoint on it. I would say that happens, though, in like 1 out of 10 or 15 of these problems. From alpha readers, I am generally taking, I would say, of the things that Peter and Karen put in, I'm taking 75 to 80%. In some way, I'm changing because of something they highlighted. From beta readers, because they have collated them, I'm taking an equal percentage by that point, or even maybe a higher percentage, because people have already culled those down. But you're missing from that the 50 to 70% that don't even make it into the document because Peter sees it and says, no, Brandon doesn't need to change this. And Peter's really good at that. And so writing group, I'm probably taking about a third, I would say, which is in line with what the beta readers would be doing that I'm taking. But I'm seeing all of them. And those ones I'm consciously discarding, where with the beta readers, I'm just not even seeing the feedback that I would be unlikely to take.
And there was one chapter in this book where you actually, right after the beta readers read it, you wrote a revised version, and we had 4 or so, a very small number of the beta readers take a second look at that one chapter, and the tweaks that you did really helped them. So and I actually am going to write an essay on that chapter to go along with the book release. So you can see that essay. There's some things I want to explain. So
another a thing that I hear from the betas, because we're friends and we chat on.
They have a secret chat that that they talk in.
They get frustrated when other fans are like, this thing that is in this book, Brandon never would have put this in, except that you guys made him do it. And the book isn't written by committee.
No.
It is a collaboration in a lot of ways, but Brandon writes the book. We tell him how we feel about the book that he's written, but he writes the book.
Right. There's not a secret cabal guiding. Like, they're a test audience. And if I'm changing something, it's because a significant number of beta readers are having a reaction I didn't intend, expect, or want. Or one beta reader or 2 raises an issue that I'm like, wow, I totally want to change that. I didn't know until they'd mentioned it. There is never any pressure. Like, they don't have that opportunity, right? They get, I see a document, but they're not interacting with me as they're writing it. They're just giving their feedback. And I tell you, you should be really grateful to these beta readers. You'll be able to see in Dawn Chart. Dawn Chart is going to be a great example because I would say it has equivalent changes to Words of Rhythm of War, just in smaller form. And you can go read the draft before the beta readers and after. And I think you will find the types of changes that they are inspiring to make are very much contribute to the success of the story. What is the funniest or most interesting error that almost went out but didn't? I can tell you one that did. I think we caught this one. My favorite, well, maybe you'll have a different one. My favorite is when I said that so the Mistborn books have ball scenes and lots of cool things, and there's a scene and where Vin and Ellen are talking, and it's in one of the later books. It's either 2 or 3. Where they're talking, Vin's talking about how different their lives were. And she says, you're a man of magnificent balls. And I'm a child of the streets, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't see it. But writing group sure did. And they're like, oh, yes, he is a man of magnificent balls. I think that one got changed.
Well, to follow up that one of the beta readers' favorite ones is when Shallan was complimenting Adolin's tight shirt, but there was no R.
Yeah, those are the typos that are hard because they don't get a wavy line under them.
Yeah.
Right. And so so glad you caught that one. I often mention the one that the first one of these that happened is Elantris. I had named Adonis first. And I had just done it creating out of the it was called the Spirit of Adonis then. And it just read, Adonis reads the same as Adonis, the Greek mythological figure. And I had not put 2 and 2 together. I had created this aeon that meant this thing. And I was all like, this happens to you. You name something, and you don't even make the connection that it is actually a word in our language or our shared experience that means something.
Yeah, because his names are made up, he thinks of them as a specific sound.
I just think of the sounds, and then I write the words out. That's why Dallin are spelled differently in Way of King's Prime.
And so when I hit some of these names, I'm like, you can't name a person that.
Yeah.
It's
that when you sound it out a different way from the way I'm saying it, the way it works on the page, it just doesn't work the same.
Yeah.
So yeah, that happens. Are there any scenes, a fan asks, that I wanted to include that got cut and didn't make it into the story? This doesn't really happen. It happened in Wheel of Time. And as I spoke of earlier, this was Harriet's instinct being better for mine for what belongs in that series. It doesn't happen on my own series because if I'm cutting it, it's because it doesn't belong. And I'm never regret that. I do regret once in a while, like things I've done where as I get more experience, I'm like, I could have told that part of the story better, but they're not things that get cut that I don't want cut. Not anymore. And actually, it's never happened. Even on my first book, and all the things I cut because I believed they belonged on the cutting room floor.
But some of the ones that you cut from Elantris later ended up there was the scene about the ball game, throwing the balls.
Yep. Just ended up in Warbreaker. Yep. A lot of things, I call it the wood chipper. I throw things in the wood chipper, which is this idea of it turns it into its constitute pieces that you can then recombine in a new way. Nothing's ever cut completely. Everything's always there to maybe be reused at some point. How much does the structure of the book change from draft 1 to draft 5? Usually not a lot. If the structure is changing, something significant is wrong. The structure of Starsight changed, the second Skyward book, because while writing the book, I came to realize that I needed to remove some characters because they were working as a crutch too much for Spensa in the story. And that required major significant rewrites to the structure. And that was a really hard revision. Normally, structure doesn't change. Characters' tone, perspective changes, and new chapters get added. But the whole overall feel of it, usually I'm pretty good at that in outline. That's what the outline is doing for me, is it's giving me the shape of a book and the shape of an arc that I can then build my story on. It's like if you see someone do a model out of clay, they will put in a skeleton, usually out of wires or tinfoil or something that they mold the clay upon. And a great outline for me is that structure. And I'll know the equivalent of if I have to have 2 legs and 2 arms for this model. And that stuff doesn't generally change.
One thing that, I've had people ask, when you write draft 1, you don't write chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. You write Kaladin, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and then Shallan. And then in second draft, you start putting them together and which scene should go before.
And that hops around a lot. So it's a good thing to bring out. Certain scenes, so like the smaller scale structure of what the order things are in, that does change around a lot. And like in Dawn Shard, I had to make a big kind of, not a small structural change to the last few chapters in order to change the pacing. Basically, the pacing bouncing between a very serious scene and a not so serious scene was really off. And beyond that, I wanted the tension of the 2 scenes to kind of align. So I needed to move a scene before another scene. That sort of stuff happens a lot, but the structure of the story is still the same, right? And so not a lot. So last question we'll do is, were there any unexpected hurdles when editing Rhythm of War? So yes and no. You always expect there to be hurdles. You're not sure what they're going to be. You hope that the book will not have any big hurdles, right? Any big things that need to be revised. But you always know that there's a possibility. There's a possibility that I send the book out to alpha readers and it comes back and they're like, this just doesn't work at all. Something hugely wrong with this story is happening. Doesn't happen very often. In fact, I can't think of it happening for us on a major book. This is in part because I show my whole team the outline for the book before I do it, so they know and can give me red flags. But there are always things that you don't expect. And in this book, one of the things that was an unexpected hurdle that maybe I could have anticipated, and I anticipated a little, but not to the extent, was that a number of the readers found the flashback sequences boring. And this is because of revisions early in the series, we had added a lot more of the Parshendi's culture into those books when I kind of had planned to save some of that for this book. And what it meant was that a lot of the Venli flashbacks then were retreading the same ground for people. And so to revise that, I needed to make Venli's character change more dynamically so that so the progress was not you were learning new things, it was the progress of watching Venli change. And that's a subtle shift, but in the original flashbacks, I kind of started her as she was, as you expect her to be. And in the new version, I backed her up, made her more sympathetic, and kind of showed more of a downfall, which gave more motion to her scenes, which then gives something else to latch onto in those scenes, because a lot of them are the scenes just seen from a different perspective that you've already gotten. Now, the reason I say I did anticipate this to an extent is because I, going into it, had realized this was just why I split the flashbacks to Venli and Eshonai, because they would all originally were going to be Eshonai, but those would have been even more so the same that you got before, because we got so much Eshonai in previous books. So by adding in half Venli scenes, I thought maybe that would shake it up and add more diversity, which I think it did, but it wasn't quite enough. So I made this other tweak as well. These are the sorts of things that, you know something's going to happen, but you don't expect it. I also added multiple scenes to Venli's viewpoint in the present day to kind of help contrast and balance those scenes, which I think gives more of a view of how much she's changed, which also helps with that sense of we're watching change, we're watching motion, we're engaging in a story, not just getting a list of facts. So you'll have to tell me what you think of those. I appreciate everyone hanging out with us for this launch party. Thank you for dealing with the digital version of a launch party. I think we can get a lot more people this way, so it does have a silver lining. But I know a lot of you are looking forward to coming and seeing me in person. You'll have to settle for this instead, but I really appreciate Peter and Karen joining me. And you guys should all appreciate them for all the work they do, because there is a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes and a lot of frustration and hair pulling out. Peter didn't used to be bald. And then the books came along. Thanks very much.